EdTech Mondays Africa is supported by the Mastercard Foundation Centre for Innovative Teaching and Learning and is part of the Mastercard Foundation Young Africa Works programming.
Glad you could join us on yet another edition of EdTech Mondays Africa. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. On this edition, we speak to the role of policy in advancing EdTech across the continent. Despite increased investment in EdTech in Africa, learning outcomes have yet to change considerably in some countries. Taking lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic, countries such as Rwanda and Ethiopia are well on course with an EdTech policy and strategy. Ghana is now in the early stages of developing an EdTech strategy as well. Other African countries have ICT in education strategies to guide investment in technology too, but are they based on country-specific challenges? According to the World Bank's Education and Technology Readiness Index, which identifies and measures the different enabling factors required for EdTech to be practical, policy and practice are some of the foundational components that need to be well structured for technology in education to be effective. While we can never replace the magic that happens between the classroom and teachers, frameworks that inform overall technology usage in learning are needed. On this edition of EdTech Mondays Africa, we ask, for a continent with a deficit of close to 15 million teachers and one that is starting to pivot from traditional teaching methods to technology-enabled teaching methods, what is the role of policy in advancing education technology in Africa? What should be prioritized in the formulation of EdTech policies? We are joined by Dr. Yao Osei Educhung, the Minister of Education in Ghana, Conrad Sake, Minister for Basic and Senior Secondary Education in Sierra Leone, and joining us virtually from Ghana's Cape Coast is Regina Mensah from Inspiring Teachers Ghana. In studio with us, we have Suraj Shah, who is the Head of Strategic Partnerships and Thought Leadership at the Mastercard Foundation Centre for Innovative Teaching and Learning. Thank you both so much for joining us. And we need to start with a conversation that we had on the sidelines of the Ministerial Forum on EdTech in Africa that happened in Abuja, Nigeria, where we spoke to the two ministers, Dr. Yao Osei Educhung and Sierra Leone's Minister for Basic and Senior Secondary Education. And we started by asking them to assess their education systems and what some of the policies that are in place have been able to achieve.
The Ghanaian education system is undergoing a major transformation from kindergarten all the way to the university. Every aspect of the education system is being retooled in our response to the fourth industrial revolution. We believe that in this knowledge economy, our bauxite resources, our mineral resources, gold, everything matters, but doesn't matter much compared to our human capital development. We've invested so much so that every child in Ghana now has an opportunity of going to senior high school. It didn't used to be the case 7 to 8 years ago. At that time, if you did not come from a home where the parent could afford to send you to senior high school, your education journey ended at junior high. But we recognize that in this fourth industrial revolution, everything is changing. Jobs that we knew were so good, reliable, will no longer exist in the next few years. So in order for Ghana to remain competitive in the global economy or global sphere of things, the government decided that education, moving from kindergarten all the way through high school to the university, had to be looked at through a different prism altogether, and that brought about the free secondary. At the tertiary level, we used to have a student loan, but somebody had to guarantee for you. But now we say no guarantor. Anybody can walk in with your national ID and you can get a loan to secure for yourself tertiary education. But we've also begun to look at the purpose of education. We are looking at the relevance of our education system. And that is what took us to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Then we began to look at how do we build new schools that are focused on STEM. How do we ensure that our young women get similar opportunities as a young men. So we started developing STEM high schools for girls to make sure that we can get their numbers up. The good news, though, is that Ghana have attained secondary parity in secondary education in terms of gender parity. Before the introduction of free secondary, for every 100 boys that were in high school, there will be 68 girls. But this year, this academic year, for every 100 boys, we have 106 girls in our senior high schools.
Right.
Fascinating story. And that is what takes us to a place where we say, in Ghana, it's about the courses the women are pursuing. It's no longer about them going to high school. So we also have to open to them the opportunity for STEM education. So this is how EdTech space is working in Ghana.
Sierra Leone, as you've said, has 8 million people. In 2018, they decided to introduce what I would call poor policies in the educational system. So they introduced an initiative called the Free Quality School Education Initiative. Through this process, they offered free tuition to young people, free examination, you have free school meals, you have free teaching and learning materials, and all of those. As a result of that, we have had an increase of 1 million learners in the system. But just to go a little bit into detail, Sierra Leone has also experienced 3 major shocks in our history. First, there was an 11-year of civil war where the infrastructure was destroyed. Teachers were either killed or they moved to other countries, and some of them never returned. We also, at the end of that war, when we started to recover, we then realized that there was now a new virus in town called Ebola, and our educational system had to shut down for about 2 years. And like everybody else in the world, we also had the mishap of COVID-19, where the educational system had to shut down again. As a result of that, the government took a deliberate action that introducing educational technology might be the best tool to leapfrog our way to the 21st century, but also to recover for the learning loss that we've had as a result of those 3 shocks. So this is why educational technology sits right at the center of our educational system.
Interesting. 2 different countries with 2 different, sets of education systems. And you can clearly tell, Suraj, that Sierra Leone has actually gone through quite, the challenges with the Ebola pandemic and also with the COVID-19 pandemic. But I want to hear your quick reactions to the remarks made by both honorable ministers. I'm going to start with you, Regina, and then I'll come to Suraj in studio.
After listening to both ministers, what I would want to actually look at is they've all come up with fine policies that probably are working in both countries, including mine. But what I want us to look at is the implementation stage, where the problem is. Policies are there, but they are crafted to be implemented. And so it is at the implementation stage that you really get the right effect of that kind of policy that has been formulated. I'm saying this because I happen to be in between. I've happened to work with some of these policies being implemented, and I'm kind of a trainer in between. I've been with a standard-based, I've been with a common core program, and now I'm with a secondary school that my minister is talking about. But when we go out there, we realize that the problem is with the right resources for implementation. So it is my belief that with this gap, if the 2 current ministers will look at it well, then these very fine policies are going to give us the fine results that they need be.
Great. Suraj, what are your thoughts?
I really would like to commend the 2 ministers from Ghana and Sierra Leone for spearheading the new kind of education needed. I'll come back to Regina's point because she's got a very valid point. One of the things is, we worked with these 2 ministers in the Abuja event, as well as in Ghana. We've got a deeper relationship. And let's start with Dr. Ejetum in Ghana. And he keeps talking about the fourth industrial revolution a couple of times. This is very, very important to note. The current education systems that we all kind of experienced when we came out of school, and which I'm still seeing practiced in the majority of schools in Africa, is where a teacher stands in front of a classroom and he or she speaks and people take notes, etc., and kind of absorb that one-way information. This level of education systems actually started in the first industrial revolution. We have changed significantly. The access of information we have has changed significantly. The ideas in which young people absorb information coming out has changed significantly. So I think we need to pivot. We need to pivot the way our classrooms are run. And I like the way that both ministers have started to think. The other thing, of course, is when they start working on these policies, they're already ahead. One in Sierra Leone, Mr. Saki is talking about how do we make sure that we minimize any kind of learning losses in the future when there's any kind of shock to the system. We also make the education system resilient. And you can only do this when you introduce technology, so that if physical learning comes to an end in a classroom, then you know that there is a way to sort of learners to continue learning while the classrooms are out. You go back to Dr. Ejetum, and what he talked about was STEM. He's also talking about leveling the playing field. He says, equity, gender disparities must improve, and which he has. But also the other thing is the access of education. And that is very important. And that's where EdTech comes in place, is how do you make sure that there's quality, relevant education everyone across these countries. Coming to Regina's point, she has a very valid point. She says, let's hear out, when these policies come out, let's support them, but policy is one thing. The existence of a policy doesn't always mean that everything will be done right. It's how that policy is implemented which will be very important. And this is where I think all the EdTech stakeholders in our countries need to come into play.
And speaking of the EdTech policies, what should be prioritized when formulating EdTech policies in Africa, given the fragmented challenges that we're dealing with, but also the different levels of progress across the African countries? What should we be prioritizing? Suresh, let me start with you.
I think first of all is to understand why are we putting this EdTech policy. Dr. Ejetum actually referred to this. The global jobs landscape is changing. And he talked about how do we make Ghana's sort of the youth employability on a par on a global level. So what is it that we're trying to achieve by creating an EdTech policy? Is it just to put devices and the internet in the hands of teachers and learners, or is it with a purpose in mind? And then kind of do a scan of who has access to what level of technology. Where are the skills gap at? So how do we make sure that, first of all, we bridge those skills gap, especially for the educators? Learners we've seen are adopting to technology that can put you and me to shame. But how do we make sure that there's skills there? But also making sure that we don't wait for everyone to be on par, because we're also seeing, on the other hand, some very, very innovative, locally developed EdTech solutions that are bridging some of these gaps in access. So, how do we make sure those are in? Those, I think, should be priorities. But one of the other things when drafting these policies, listen to all our stakeholders. Take everyone's view, the EdTech community, the users, which are, the learners, the teachers, but most importantly, the parents. What is the data pointing at? Let's put all of that into perspective. We've seen already through some of the ministerial forums we've had is the governments are saying this is now not something we will do it alone. And they're open to working with stakeholders. That will create the recipe for success, is when they open working with private EdTech stakeholders.
Right. I like that. Regina, I want to know from you, maybe you could speak about the indicators of an effective EdTech policy. Based on what the minister has said and some of the remarks, you just mentioned that we are not short of policies. The policies are there, but what are some of the indicators of an effective policy?
Yes, we have some indicators that we really need to look at how we can increase accessibility to technology education to all communities, especially the less privileged and marginalized communities. And so technology literacy should be encouraged. This is one of the indicators that we can look at. Another one too is to look at how we can measure the upward trajectory of learning outcomes. So we can say that, for example, it's an example that probably by 2026, we would see that by implementing policy XYZ, our country's number of candidates would have increased, and their performance would have increased up to this percentage in their basic education examination. That's just an example. So when we have that, it can also help us to be able to come out with a policy that is well geared towards making teaching and learning effective. And then I would also like to talk about trying to increasing the gender gap, where we have like what he said that we have to have equal number of, my minister even said that, have the equal number of boys and girls having access to technology in education.
I like that. And, one of the challenges that some countries are facing today is the fact that, a lot of focus has been placed on the learner or the student, and less focus is being placed on the teachers. So we asked the honorable ministers how their countries are doing in terms of striking a balance where we are seeing focus on both the student or the learner as well as the teacher. And let's listen into what they had to say. Then we'll be back and continue the conversation.
I think what's fascinating is Ghana started one tablet, one laptop, one teacher before the deployment of the student tablet. So the teachers were ahead of the curve. And then we had funding from the World Bank, a grant from the World Bank to train teachers as to how to acquire online teaching skills. So that also happened. And then through our National Teaching Council, which is the organization that licensing teachers, continuous professional development courses were offered as to how to acquire literacy skills. Then we began to take a look at our teacher education regime and realized that we used to have 2 years in the classroom, 1 year in the field, and you become a teacher. And we felt in this 21st century that was not enough. So 4 years ago, we introduced a 4-year bachelor degree program 5 years ago. The graduates are out, and their expertise is very different. They had 4 years, a bachelor's degree, even if you're going to teach kindergarten. And these people now have the requisite technological skills to step into our classroom any day and be able to make a major impact. But the continuous professional development is key. We've set up professional learning communities in our schools, and teachers are getting on-the-job training in order to be proficient in the deployment of the technology. So we're involving the headmasters, we're involving the teachers, because the whole thing is, I've taught for many years, and I taught in America, built charter schools in America.
Right.
And one of the things I realized there was that for technology integration to help, you always have to ensure that you are pointing out to the teacher that your job is going to be made easier. The moment they know that the technology is going to help them and is going to make their job easier, the moment they understand that with AI, I'll be able to develop quality lesson plans, then adopting technology is not something that's difficult for them because it's going to make their work easier. The moment they know that I can access my students online and I'll get the data in real time, in a short period of time, to see how each one of them is doing, then they know you are helping make their job easier. Therefore, they then spend time to learn the technology that is going to help make their work easier. But if it is another activity to be done to satisfy us, the policymakers, then that is where people become hesitant and then they kick against it. And you may think we have something exciting, but the teacher says this is not exciting to me,
right? Because
you're going to make my job difficult. So I always advise, from experience integrating technology in my schools in the US, you have to find a way for the teacher to know that this is a game changer for me. Instead of spending an hour, now I'm going to spend 20 minutes. Therefore, I'm going to learn how to use this tool because it's going to make my job easier. And it's going to also ensure that I know how the students are doing. I can do targeted instruction. I can personalize instruction. So far as we provide those tools, technology implementation becomes one of the most enhancing activities for a teacher, not a chore. And I think that is the most important thing that people should learn from.
If you're introducing EdTech, you have to train your teachers as to how to use it effectively. You have to also align the training to make sure that it gives you the educational outcomes that you set out to achieve. I'm very confident, and I say that because we've done it the other way around. We started off using EdTech, and before we actually started implementing the policy. So by doing it that way, when we started the policy, we were able to ask the why, the what, the how, and we have put in indicators to ensure that we can measure that as we go along.
The why, the what, and the how, I think those are important questions we need to ask ourselves in this whole policy implementation process. But I also like the fact that Dr. Educhum also spoke to the fact that before there was the one laptop per child initiative, there was the one laptop per teacher. Regina, based on your experience, how has that worked out in Ghana? And is this the reality on the ground? Please talk to us about that.
I think it comes back to my first submission about sustainability when it comes to implementation. And so it is for this reason that my organization, Inspiring Teachers Ghana, we are looking at using the smartphone, and we have been able to put on the Smart Coach app, which we use, or we train school leaders on how to even conduct professional learning communities. And for this reason, we see that it is easily accessible. We train them one-on-one, and we have reached out to some of these less privileged communities. Last week, I was in Fosu, some of the outskirts, and it will surprise you. They just didn't even know how to use the QR code, just to get onto it and start entering the details. We had to take them through. So these are the things that we are talking about. Again, talking about the teacher. So here you see that the focus is on the teacher, and then it will directly translate into the classroom because we coach them on teaching practices and classroom management and all that. Another aspect of this Smart Coach app, which Inspiring Teachers has taken on, is to do with the literacy aspect, where we have installed on it assessment and oral fluency assessments. And for this, we are able to track the child's fluency level by, taking the teachers through it. And this easily and readily informs the teacher about the progress of his or her learner. And based on that, he's able to, do something about it in the classroom. And it also gives us that direct information. So that is what we are doing. Right now, we are in 40 basic private basic schools. And our target is the low fee paying schools. So you see, we are looking at how to make it very inclusive. And then going that way, we know that the people there honestly need help. And that is why we are saying that stakeholders should come in to help us with funding. And with that, we'll get on to get the target that EdTech seeks to achieve.
Great. Suresh, I want to hear your thoughts as well, because as far as we are seeing, based on Honorable Minister Conrad Sake's remarks, the when, the how, the why, and also the where play a huge role in making sure that our policies actually do work for us. The intention meets the purpose. Talk to us more about that.
So it's what I previously mentioned is, before you put pen to paper, well, now that is an old saying, but when you're drafting a policy, the focus, the North Star, why are we doing this? That is very important. And then who needs to get involved in what levels? That's also very important. As we keep saying, all stakeholders need to come together to say we can contribute towards this part, we can contribute towards teachers' professional development, to access of devices, etc. Regina has a very important point she talks about is smartphones. And Regina, we've even come across locally developed solutions on feature phones. Because let's face it, realities, even in peri-urban situations in Africa, even a smartphone is expensive, is not always possible, or data is not always possible. But sometimes we've seen learning continuing with a feature phone. One parent has a feature phone, and X number of their children or children under their care can actually learn. Teachers are sending multiple choice questions through a server on a feature phone. So while access to device is getting a lot better than it was, say, about 5 to 10 years ago, we still need to make sure that all that learning comes under a focus, a goal of why are they learning? Why are we learning this way? What are we trying to achieve out of these skills that are being honed into the learners, into the educators, as well as, carrying on learning, the relevant, focused learning. Some of the things that were very interestingly we heard back in our ministerial forum in 2022 in Kigali was, in order to learners to catch up with the learning losses while they were at home, we had to curtail curriculum. And so then we assessed them, that we saw that there wasn't a lot of sort of losses based on curtailing the curriculum. That makes us question, are we still on the right path of loading so much curriculum? Can we make relevance out of our current curriculum using technology? Kenya is on its path of competency-based curriculum. That may kind of help shape the learners, keep up with what are they good at and how will they achieve this. But here again, it's technology that will help them create. AI came up. Dr. Ejetum talked about AI quite often. The other point that Dr. Ejetum also made was access to students by teachers who are now using technology and a lot of data. EdTech policies need to make concessions on what is, how would we collect data through the implementation of education technology across the country? What is that data informing us, and how do we keep, making sure that our implementation's on the right path? Do we need to follow up in 3 years and relearn and point ourselves in a different direction? So that's also very, very important.
Great. And so when we talk about this, of course, there's the power of comprehensive EdTech policies, but also we know that not all African countries, or African governments in this case, are on the right trajectory when it comes to drawing up the strategies or the roadmaps and the policies themselves. Tell us about some of the partnerships we have where we have supported the drafting and strategizing on EdTech policy.
I keep talking about the 2022 Ministerial Forum, but it was a very important Ministerial Forum because most ministries of education emerged from the COVID-19 pandemic. In all our lifetime, we've never seen shocks to our systems like the pandemic presented. Learners were sent home, teachers were sent home. Ministries struggled to find out where they were, what kind of technology they have access to. A lot of them pivoted and started doing radio and TV lessons, hoping that learners would tap in and listen and continue some form of education. But in that forum, the ministers, representatives of governments came up to us and said, it is now time to put some resilience into our education system. Not only to overcome shocks like this in the future, but to also make sure that with this, we're opening up education for those out-of-school learners as well. In Africa, you look at I don't have the statistic on me, but more and more girls drop out from secondary school level of education. What if we had a way to make sure that there's learning anytime, anywhere? So that sort of when we're doing these policies, these are the kind of work that... So based on that feedback, Mastercard Foundation Centre for Innovative Teaching and Learning partnered with the World Bank on supporting countries' mainstream hybrid models of learning. Some of the work in this area is something what we call Policy Academy. It is a sort of like a support tutorial as such to think through what those strategies would look like when you're developing a hybrid model of learning. But it's one thing to say that we will have a hybrid model of learning and we'll have a policy that supports it. Do we have the sort of resources for it? How do we plan for that? So all of that comes through our support to these countries from the partnership with the World Bank. We did one policy academy in 2023. 12 countries took part across Africa, and the Sahel region is the 13th region. A lot of the countries came up with some amazing strategies that they're now internalizing and kind of working on to say, where can we start implementing some part of it as a proof of concept to understand how well a hybrid model will work, circumstances, the resources the country has. But two countries, Rwanda and Ethiopia, I believe you made reference to that, Joy, actually went the next step and said, we're ready. We're ready to start translating this into a policy which we can use to implement and invite all other stakeholders to implement. So both countries, in Rwanda, the policy is undergoing the final approvals within the government. In Ethiopia, the policy and strategy has been approved.
Great. And that's some progress that we're seeing. Regina, I want to hear from you from a teaching perspective, but also from a programmatic perspective. I want to know from you, how do we promote through EdTech policies sustainable learning that can be continued across the board without really having to be affected by, for example, political navigations and changes within countries?
If we have a well-streamlined monitoring and evaluation process going on, I think that looking at it, it will give us the right feedback for the sustainability of these, in the implementation of these policies. I'm saying this because if these monitoring and evaluation measures or tools are not well streamlined or well laid down, you will have a checkered kind of system where a very nice policy is brought up, stakeholders brought on board, and suddenly the reason for the policy itself being made is not achieved. I mean, the purpose is not achieved. And then it will be a lot of money going down the drain. So I believe that when we have very well done monitoring and evaluation tools, it will give us the feedback that we need. And then we go back to review these policies and come back again and make it more and more effective.
At the start of this conversation, the first thing that the Minister of Education in Ghana mentioned was that we're not just, sending our students to school for the sake of it, but we're doing this so they can play a huge role in becoming a part of the world's human capital. And that brings me to the question on the future of work. When we look at the policies that we're putting in place, are they speaking to preparing our young people for the future of work or propelling them to play a part in the future of work? For example, the EdTech policies that are currently being developed, are they speaking to that?
So you have to be very intentional on that. But what you don't know, you don't know. So where are the next 10 years jobs coming from? Do we ever know? We have certain future scientists that can help us build that. So how do we integrate what we have now, but keep the policy flexible, keep the pedagogy system flexible? What we're seeing is, during my times, we all excelled in a vertical because there was a job for us. Now there aren't. So how do we ensure that our teaching methodologies, the technology we use, are making learners kind of more horizontal and kind of adaptable to change, and then kind of have a wider concept of what works than kind of, very, very specialized fields. So in the two policies that I've talked about in Rwanda and Ethiopia, they've actually put in clauses to check again on the policy reviews to see if they're on course with vis-a-vis the new sort of jobs out there, etc. It's on everyone's tip of their tongues to talk about big data, AI, and saying this is where jobs are. But who's going to grow the food? Who's going to make the roads? Who's going to, engineer new medicines? All of that also will need a lot of science put into it, a lot of technology know-how put into it. We're already seeing that the medicine and doctors and operations are going to be taken over by robots. But those jobs that the robots will replace also need to go into those who create that technology. So I think it's a win-win situation. The policies just need to be nimble and very, very flexible to change.
The Ghanaian education system is in a very unique place. If you look at the construction of STEM schools, and we are not looking at the art, we are not leaving out the arts. We're also doing creative arts high school, for example, that is going to bring students from across the country and going to train them and get them participate in the global economy in terms of the creative arts, which is a very vibrant part of what people are doing in Nigeria. So what we are doing is not to leave at the arts, but I always say that STEM is not grounded enough. So if you want to go to STEM, STEM may lose steam. So we are focused on STEM, but not to the exclusion of the arts. And I believe that balanced education is something that will be of great benefit to us. But in Ghana, we've also recognized that you cannot do 21st century learning in 19th century buildings. So there's a major infrastructure overhaul. Right. You look at the new junior high schools we are building, you look at new community schools we are building, we are moving full steam ahead into 21st century infrastructure. Because if we don't, we'll be paying lip service to education. And we don't want to be one of those countries where we just pay lip service. Right. We are in the 21st century, but we know the children are sitting in dilapidated classrooms. If we don't make African children the best in the world, it's our fault, and not the fault of the children.
We have the same problems as most of the African countries. I think Kenya is even more sophisticated than Sierra Leone. So in terms of connectivity, I am pretty sure that connectivity is better in Kenya than in Sierra Leone. But you may recall, when I started, I did say to you that we have a mix of high-tech and low-tech. So in terms of our approach, we also have a radio teaching program, which has a coverage of about 85%. In terms of internet connectivity, it might be 5%, but it is increasing. We've introduced subjects such as robotics, coding. These are all the types of subjects that you need to live in the 21st century. And so we have made sure that we have reviewed the curriculum so that it's fit for purpose. So it is quite the opposite from what we inherited from the colonial period, which was a traditional model. And in the new curriculum, we've even gone to the extent to decolonize the curriculum to make it more nationalistic, or let's call it Pan-Africanist.
And so going forward, we need to look at some action points that we can work towards as we look at making sure that the policies don't just last us, the duration of our presidential terms, but also, extend above and beyond. How do we make sure that this happens? Regina, let me start with you.
We should come out with stringent monitoring and evaluation measures or tools that they are there and it's part of the system. Probably, let's say, the educational system. That wherever we find ourselves, this is how we go about measuring and monitoring policy A, B, C. So irrespective, and it should be accepted so that it can't be affected. Because the way you are saying it, in fact, a lot of this change in government and then a reversal and then change of policies has affected education a lot in most African countries. We can't hide from that fact. But it's high time that as stakeholders, we all come up with one voice and say that, yes, this is good. The country first. When we see the country first than the government or the political party, it will go a long way. And I believe that education, sensitization, and like I've said again, monitoring, evaluation systems should be put in place, stringent ones, so that no one can tamper with them.
No one can tamper with them. Monitoring and evaluation systems. Right, Suresh.
Involving a wider array of stakeholders that will stay beyond governments changing, ministers changing, etc., such that the policies are owned by the government rather than a person or various personnel. But she's right, monitoring and evaluation, the data collected. Let's also talk about what has worked well earlier on. If we're seeing good results, let's put it out there. so that even a new Minister of Education coming in can see, this has worked well, surely I should continue with something like this, or this has public support, so we should continue with this. But yeah, the constant pulse check, simply put, monitoring and evaluation, a constant pulse check. Are we on the right track? We had set out to do this so that it would have given us these outcomes. Can we measure some of these outcomes, rudimentary or otherwise? So be very, very specific and kind of, move from there.
Right. Somewhere in there, I think there was a conversation around data, and I think it's Regina who mentioned the value of data. But how do we even make this more intentional to inform decision-making at the policy level? Suraj?
Ministers of education across Africa had their own way of collecting data, etc. But it's still, we're not there yet. I think many struggle to understand, what is that right data? Where does it reside? How will we collect it? Once we have it, what will we do with it? What are those informed decisions we can make out of it? How do we even avail that data on a public goods platform so that everyone else has a view of it and kind of support the government or ministers of education in achieving its goals? At the Mastercard Foundation Centre for Innovative Teaching and Learning, we've partnered with the Association for the Development of Education in Africa, ADEA, to help 30 governments in the next 5 years to streamline that data process, understand what that data is, how will they collect it, and kind of be on a much higher level of collection, analysis, and information on education outcomes.
Is Ghana one of the countries?
Ghana is one of those countries.
Right. Okay, so we expect some better outcomes coming out of Ghana in coming days. And so with that, I believe that we've come to the end of this conversation, and there's quite a bit to carry forward from it. But I would like to take last words from us going forward. What are the must fixes that we need to have to carry us into the future of learning or into delivering the future of learning? Regina?
I think that what needs to be fixed to support EdTech in Africa is for African countries to come together to share their knowledge in the formulation of policies, and then also in the success stories of these policies. And then again, as they share, would like to know the effects of these policies. And based on that, countries who share the same challenges that they have in terms of lack of infrastructure, personnel, and then funding would benefit from such success stories. When it comes to funding, we could hear from them what stakeholders that came to support them. And I was saying that basically now, Inspiring Teachers, we are receiving support from the Mastercard Foundation, and that is going a long way to help us apply EdTech in teaching and learning.
Just to build on what Regina said, she's very right that how do we learn from each other? What are the best known practices? Who's come across what challenge and how did they overcome it? But also let's talk about the wins. Where were the great opportunities identified, some wins made, and how do we share that information? And I think that's the kind of purpose why the Mastercard Foundation Centre for Innovative Teaching and Learning has been bringing ministers of education in our ministerial forums so far. We've done 3. But now we've also, launched the EdTech conference, which is going to be a biannual, sort of every 2 years. Is bringing all those best known practices. And we're already seeing that, Regina, when we were in Abuja, we saw EdTech companies now going across borders to say, we've got this, and, this has been working, let's kind of work together. So I think that's actually fantastic. You did talk about funding, and I do want to say that while funding spurs certain, kind of new ideas, etc., you also said much earlier, Regina, that, sustainability. We have to look at sustainability. No one government is going to put a device on every child's hand and connectivity. That's never going to be sustainable. But if we show the parents the value of learning using technology and how that improves skills outcomes, jobs prospects, etc., parents are willing to sacrifice and put in, help support those EdTech policies.
All right, so we need buy-in from all the stakeholders, not just the governments in this case, but we also need to bring on board the other stakeholders. And actually at the EdTech conference and the ministerial forum this year, one of the major issues that did come up were the fact that there is need to invest in data. We need to review our policies, and also we need to lay the ground, the infrastructure that supports the investment of education technology across Africa. And so there's quite a bit to take out of this conversation. The why, the intentionality of the why, the how, the where, and for who, just like Honorable Minister Conrad Sake said, are some of the things that we need to put into consideration. But moving forward, how do we bring all stakeholders on board to make sure that we are intentionally investing and putting out policies that outlive our political durations across the African continent? Well, do care to join us for our next conversation. Thank you all for watching this conversation on the role of policy in advancing EdTech in Africa. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next edition.
EdTech Mondays Africa is supported by the Mastercard Foundation Centre for Innovative Teaching and Learning and is part of the Mastercard Foundation Young Africa Works programming.